Viewers, welcome to TV Metro Mail. You are watching Chit Chat. In our last episode, we also discussed about a specific issue on racism. And you know that for last couple of weeks, we have been dealing with the racism issues, different aspect of racism issues, and different kind of guest experts. They come to our show and they talk about issues related to racism. Today also we have a very special guest with us. We'll talk about a very specific aspect of racism. Our today's topic is protection from racism, how we can protect ourselves from racist activities. And I'm very delighted, I'm very privileged to have my today's guest. I'm joined by Fareed Khan. Fareed Khan is the Director of Advocacy and Media Relations and co-founder of the Rohingya Human Rights Network in Canada. He is a passionate about issues which impact human rights and civil liberties, combat racism, and support broader issues of social justice. Fareed Khan, thank you very much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
So we really appreciate that you have taken your time and joining us. We like to start with, as I said, that we have been dealing with issues related to racism and social justice in our program. This particular program called Inclusion Matters, and this program is powered by a non-for-profit organization called PACE, Progressive Action for Community Empowerment. So let us start with what has been your experience in Canada with regard to the racism.
Oh, well, on a personal level, the first racist experience that I had in Canada was only a few months after we arrived here, when I was attacked by two older white boys walking home from school, which sent me to hospital and gave me 5 stitches to my face. Before that, I didn't even know what racism was. And over the years, me and my family have experienced racism in different forms, including my younger brother, who was also sent to hospital when he was attacked by a bunch of boys when he was about, I'd say, 7 years old. And over the years, I think because of that experience, I've become very passionate about the issue. I've seen racism in different forms. Certainly, we're very aware in society about how Black people in our society have been treated by police. The disproportionate arrests and stops by police of young Black men. We also know the issue of the Indigenous people of Canada, who have faced a legacy and a history of racism and bigotry and genocide. So over the years, I've become well versed on the issue, and I'm trying to help all communities deal with the issues of hate, bigotry, and racism, and ways to counter it in this country.
So you're saying that you faced racist activities during even your life in Canada. Which year you're talking about?
1967.
1967. We hope that things have a bit changed now, but still, unfortunately, the racism exists in Canada. So, when we talk about Canada, we always say that diversity is our strength. We live in a multicultural society. We believe in multiculturalism. When a country or when people live in a multicultural society, when they believe in diversity, how come racism exists there?
Well, that's a philosophical question, but essentially, I think it's hardwired into us. Genetically speaking, going back into ancient prehistoric times, we are taught to fear, or within us is the feeling that we have to fear anything that's different. If we don't know it, if it's different from us, then we have learned to fear it. But we don't live in prehistoric times anymore. There's not some stranger with spears and arrows coming across the horizon to try and attack us. We now live in a pluralistic society, in a pluralistic world, where we have to depend on each other, and those fears are groundless and they're based on ignorance. People who have racist tendencies have learned them from their environments, maybe even their homes. If you look at, young children playing together, 4 years old, and they're all of different backgrounds. They don't care whether the person they're playing with, the other child that they're playing with, is either black or Jewish or Muslim. They're just playing with other children, and their behavior is based on how they're treated by that other person. If that other person treats them in a friendly way, they have no issue with them. So skin color doesn't come into it. Faith doesn't come into it. Where the person was born doesn't come into it. It's only when we get older that we start delineating these differences. And therefore, I believe it is incumbent on us to make sure that our youth are educated and told that, difference is just a part of life. The fact that you've got a girl in your class who wears a hijab doesn't make her less of a person. The fact that you have someone who might be indigenous or black or Jewish does not make them less equal in any way. And part of the solution is public education starting at a very young age, and when you get into the higher grades in high school, mandatory classes that look at issues of human rights and racism in the history of the way this country was founded, because essentially this country was founded based on racism and white supremacy.
So, as you said that to get rid of this racism, the big issue is ignorance, because there are a number of people, they are ignorant about the whole thing. That's why they do this kind of activities. And you also talked about the public education as well, that people need to be educated. So, my next question is with regard to education, that we know that the racist behavior, attitude, or act, it comes from the personal belief, or your personal biasness. So if we like to talk about those issues, if we like to start educating people in the community, so in a diverse community like Canada, how we should start this kind of conversation when we are so diverse?
Well, I think part of it is to make sure that the circle of people that you associate with and socialize with don't only come from one group, because when you have that, whatever inherent biases you may have might be reinforced by other people. So I was very fortunate growing up in Toronto. I went to a high school where we had students from 80, 80 different countries, black, white, brown, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, all kinds of people from all backgrounds. And so I grew up with friends who came from this diverse, basically a microcosm of the world. And so I learned to accept the differences. Unfortunately, not everybody has that experience growing up. So therefore, in those circumstances, it requires a more active approach to try and educate them about the fact that, for example, how many people know that we take in 350,000 immigrants a year? How many people know that roughly 20+% of Canadians are now visible minorities? How many know that more than 5% of Canadians are indigenous? Like, these sorts of things have to be taught, and these differences have to be expressed and taught in a way that shows them not to be threatening. We all have to realize that other than the indigenous people of this land, we are all immigrants. Whether you're white or not, you're an immigrant. And so, to the white people who are out there who basically see this, see people who are coming from places like Africa and South Asia and the Middle East and China, and they see them as a threat. Well, how do you think the indigenous people feel? With the land that they once owned, which was stolen from them, being basically controlled by people who are not like them. And indigenous people have been very patient in what they have experienced. And I think that, the people who consider themselves old stock, so-called old stock Canadians, need to basically rewire their brains as to how they approach people who don't look like them. Uh, if someone was to hear me talking on the radio and did not know my name or what I did, or they wouldn't know that I wasn't Canadian. I mean, my accent doesn't, I came here young enough that, I acquired a Canadian accent. So, even if I walk into a room, I'm more fair skinned than a lot of Muslims, a lot of South Asians. I don't stand out as much as other people do. Okay. And that's the thing. You want to be able to walk into a room, and regardless of what you look like, what your skin color is, you don't want to be seen as different. You're just another person. And we have to try and impress this upon our youth. And in addition, I believe there needs to be a nationally led, nationally funded public education campaign explaining the important contributions that immigrants and minority communities have made to this country. I don't know how many people are aware, but the first Muslims in Canada, what became Canada, arrived here as slaves. So the blood of Muslims is soaked into this land, and the first free Muslims arrived here in the 1850s before Confederation. So we've been here longer than Canada has been around. So we are just as much a part of this country as anybody else, and we belong here, as do others. I mean, blacks were here, they were first brought here as slaves as well. The Chinese and East Asian populations, they were brought here as indentured labor to build our railways and, build this country. And then racist policies were put in place to try and prevent them from bringing their families over. So we need to address these issues. We need to acknowledge the racist history of this country and the fact that some of our leaders were racist. And we need to educate the public, about that history and try and create new paths to, have a country that accepts the diversity and pluralism and does not see it as a threat.
Thank you very much. You have, put a lot of emphasis on education, because we need to educate our public, and we need to go back to our history as well, which can, give us some kind of lesson that, who we are and where we came from. Since we are talking about the education and educational institutions, so even these days also we see in our education, in students, they are facing a lot of discrimination or racist act. Even those who are working, the young population, they face discrimination at their workplace as well. So how come these young people, young professionals, they can protect themselves from these racist activities or racist discrimination?
Well, I think part of it is to be aware of what's happening around you. If you feel that the people that you work with are using language or acting in a way that is deemed to be racist, I think you have to bring that to the attention of the senior people within your organization. I think what has happened this year in 2020, in particular, in the aftermath of the George Floyd shooting, there is now very much a heightened public awareness about the toxicity of racism in our society. There was an incident this past weekend just outside Toronto at a golf course where a white man, issued a burst of racist slurs against a South Asian person who was playing golf ahead of him. And it was caught on video. When that video was revealed, the company that he worked for automatically terminated him because they said, this is not part of our culture. We will not tolerate this. And I think that is the attitude that workplaces need to take. There is no tolerance for racism. Even if you do it outside the workplace, we will not accept that kind of behavior or people who believe in that kind of ideology. And I think there needs to be that sort of a carrot and stick approach, education. But then when people do behave in a racist manner or talk in a racist way, they need to be, told very firmly, this is not acceptable. And, they might be given a second chance, but beyond that, they should be told that, no, we're not going to have any of it. In the case of this man who was fired, he was at a very senior position. He was the chief financial officer of the company. And at that senior level, I don't think a company wants someone with, who has been revealed to be a racist to be representing them in the community. And so they terminated him. And there have been other incidents that we've noticed on social media of people being fired from their jobs because uh, they expressed racist sentiments or behaved in a racist manner.
I think that's the beauty of Canada, that even the corporate sectors, they don't favor anyone. They don't want to be identified as a racist organization. So definitely that's why they have taken this measure, and they want their chief financial officer quit from the organization.
Well, no, I mean I agree with you to a certain extent, but not all corporations are that way. There was recent articles on about people from Facebook who left the company because they felt that the policies within Facebook were such that they were favoring right-wing and extremist groups online and not acting to eliminate racism on their platform, which is very different from the public statements made by Mark Zuckerberg. Social media has a huge role to play, not only in trying to fight racism, but it's also played a huge role in actually disseminating racism and hate. And Facebook being the biggest, they have a social responsibility to make sure that they are not part of the problem. And when you have employees, or former employees saying that they talk the talk but they don't walk the walk, then I think you've got a problem. So while you do have incidents like this company that fired this man for the outburst on the golf course, you have other companies who don't behave as speedily. And so that is also part of the process. We have to actually change the culture of society. There was a time in in Canada where people would casually tell racist jokes and people would laugh even if they were uncomfortable and they wouldn't do anything. I think that wouldn't be tolerated anymore in most social circles. And I think that sort of casual racism, was the surface, what was shown on the surface of a deeper racism within society. We now know how deep racism goes in Canada, not just broadly in society, but systemic racism in governments as well, and all kinds of public and private institutions. But now we have a public awareness, and not only that, I think one of the good things is that we have a broad sector of younger people who have grown up in a more pluralistic society, who have ideals, who are saying, "I'm sorry, we're not going to." We're not going to sit by. And all you have to see as evidence of that is the tens of thousands of people that were part of demonstrations across Canada earlier in the summer against racism.
So it seems that the systemic racism still exists, and with regard to those, what are the system, the policy, or the arrangement are available in Canada which can protect us from the racism?
Well, we do have hate crime laws, but unfortunately, they're not frequently applied. Um, I think right now social media has become a major way of naming and shaming people who behave in a racist way if they are caught on video. But I think that there needs to be, on a governmental level, there needs to be a national strategy adopted by the federal government and led by the federal government to undertake policies and programs to eliminate racism and white supremacy across the country. We've had numerous incidents, for example, in the Toronto area over the summer of mosques being vandalized. There was an incident just this past Thanksgiving Day weekend where an email was received with death threats promising a Christchurch, New Zealand style massacre against Muslims. Now we have politicians come out and say this is not acceptable. Well, thank you to the politicians who come out and state that, but we need more than words. We need actions. We need real policies put in place. We need the police to be given authority to go after these people. We need white supremacist groups to be designated as terrorist groups, because that's what they are. We need anyone who is part or associated with those groups to be charged as terrorists if they're issuing threats of hate. So there's a lot that the government can still do, but it has yet to do. It's made promises, but it has not followed through with action. On a societal level, what we need to do, if we are happen to be at the managerial level or at the senior level in private companies is to try and make sure that these companies have policies in place that deal with racism within the workplace, and to make sure that racist act, whether they're done in the workplace or whether it's discovered that an employee does them outside the workplace, they're not acceptable. Because when an employee is outside the um, uh, company and behaving in a way that might reflect badly on the company, he is the voice of that company. So there needs to be people taking actions within the corporate institutions to make sure policies are put in place to combat racism and eliminate it. In addition to things like making sure that there's equality in hiring and promotion, so that the senior levels of companies are reflective of the diversity of society. These are the sorts of things that are going to help to reduce the amount of racism and hate we see. I doubt we'll ever eliminate it completely. I think that's an impossible task. But if we put enough effort into fighting it, I think we can be in a far better place than we are today.
I think in the beginning of your talk, you just mentioned that how important is the immigrants, new immigrants are for Canada. So, do
Mhm.
you have any specific message for new immigrants, particularly colored new immigrants, how they can protect themselves from racism?
Well, I think the best way to do it is not be isolated. Integrate yourself into the community. Have a broad social circle that includes people of backgrounds other than yours. Get involved in community institutions so that you have a social support network if you are ever subjected to such behavior or such actions. Um, be aware of the laws around racism. If you feel that you have been physically threatened in some way, that you might someone has threatened to do you harm, make sure that you report it to police. Connect with your local politicians, because your local politician, the vast majority of them can be your friends in such situations. Be part of the community. Don't be quiet. Don't be invisible, because the people who tend to become victims the most often are the ones who are isolated and who don't have a network to fall back on to help them and support them. So, if you are Muslim, then certainly you've got a Muslim community behind you. But what you also need is connections with the broader community outside the Muslim community. There's nothing wrong with having friends who are not Muslim, who are Christian or Jewish, who are Black or Indigenous or Chinese or what have you. In fact, I think it enhances your life to have people of different backgrounds as part of your social circle.
So, social circle is very important in that case, I believe.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I mean, if you're a shy person, it's difficult, but you need to get over your shyness in order to, build that social network. Because as I said, if you are an isolated individual, or if your family is isolated and you don't have that network, then it means that you don't have the social support structure in order to get help when you need it.
Thank you very much. So, what more we can do to make sure that the society or the community where we live, there is no scope or no space for racism? I know that you have talked about the education, you have talked about the policies, and is there any other specific thing that you like to mention about that we can get rid of this kind of racist activities or act?
Well, as I said, I don't think you can get rid of it completely, but I think a good way to head in that direction is to get involved in your community. So if there's a community association, get involved with it. If you have the skills, then run for the board of directors of those organizations. Community agencies, immigrant agencies, Red Cross, so forth. There's all kinds of community organizations out there, including charitable organizations, that are doing important work to building a civil society. And if the diversity of the community is reflected in the leadership and in the membership of those organizations, that goes a long way to dispelling stereotypes about about people who look different, or who have a different faith. Um, I myself, from a very young age, got involved in community organizations, and I think the younger generation is more aware of that than the older generation is. But if it's people who are recent immigrants who've arrived in Canada over the last few years, I know that the major priority is to making sure that your family is housed and fed and safe and healthy. But you need to look beyond that and look to becoming involved in the community, because that's the only way that you can demonstrate to the wider society that you have the same hopes and dreams and ambitions as they do, and to show them that you are no different, despite the fact that you may have come from another country, or that you might be of another faith, or that your skin is slightly darker. You have the same hopes and fears for yourself and your family as the vast majority of people do. And I think that interaction with the broader members of society goes a long way to dispelling any, as I said, stereotypes and fears about the fact that you're different.
Well, thank you. I think one important thing you have mentioned, that community engagement. The new immigrants, if they are engaged in the community activities, that can give them a lot of exposure as well, and
Yes.
that can show that we are really diverse community. So, but many people, they say that small change, when they try to address the issue of racism, they say the small change will not work. We need systemic changes required there to get rid of racism or racism act. So, what are these systemic change? I think we can really look for that to change in order to have a pluralistic society.
I think that absolutely correct. Small changes, while helpful, they are not the long-term solution. There need to be major changes. Systemic changes, part of that has to do with public institutions. So, for example, police. We need to have a diverse police, and we need to expunge racists and white supremacists from our police forces. Unfortunately, as we've seen from the way that Indigenous and Black and visible minority people are treated by different police forces across the country, there is a systemic racism within, a broad cross section of the police establishment across the country, even when the police chief tends to be someone who is a visible minority. So, for example, in Ottawa, we have a Black police chief, but there have been incidents of racism by police officers on social media, which he has, he has tried to deal with. So it's not necessarily about who the face is at the top of the pyramid. It's about what the culture is within these institutions, whether it's police, whether it's government agencies, whether it's hospitals. The incident, what happened a couple of weeks ago with the Indigenous woman in the hospital in Quebec, who recorded racist slurs being directed at her because she was Indigenous, is just abhorrent. It's despicable. And the people who have those attitudes do not belong in a place where they are giving care to vulnerable people. The people who have that sort of mindset have to be removed from those positions of power and influence, and the cultures have to be changed. And that's where the role of government comes in. The government needs to institute these changes and do so in an aggressive and meaningful way, because, as I said, we're beyond the stage of words. We need actions now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fareed Khan, for giving us your time. Before we wrap up this program, I just like to ask you two small things. One is, say, for example, as an individual, if he or she faces any kind of racist act or attacked by someone because of her or his color or religious or belief, so what would instantly that person should do? Like, because we found that in many occasions people are puzzled and they don't know what to do right at the moment. So immediately, what is their action? What they should do?
Well, obviously, first thing has to do with personal safety. Make sure that you are personally safe. If possible, try and record what's going on, because as we've seen, social media has played a huge role with videos of people who have said racist, used racist language or committed racist acts. Um, and where possible, of course, report these incidents to police, because unfortunately too many people who get involved in these sorts of things don't report them to police when violence is involved, or when there's a threat of violence. um, Clearly, protecting yourself and your family is the number one priority, but don't be like a deer frozen in the headlights, because that gives the aggressor more power. You actually, um, like, these people are bullies, essentially, and the only way to deal with bullies is to stand up against them and confront them, because ultimately bullies are cowards, and if they are confronted and if there's pushback, then they will walk away. But while you're doing that, I would say just be cautious that you don't put yourself in harm's way, because first thing is personal safety.
Thank you very much. Lastly, if you have any specific message to the general people about racism, so you can have that. We can have that one.
Yeah. Well, I am the founder of a group called Canadians United Against Hate. You can find us on Facebook, and our purpose is to not only connect people who are fighting hate, bigotry, and racism across the country, but also to advocate and pressure governments to undertake actions and policies that combat hate. I think all of us, regardless of what our backgrounds are, Muslim, Jew, Christian, Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, black, white, brown, Asian, we all need to come together to combat hate, because hate is like a small brush fire. If you don't deal with it at the beginning, then who knows whether it's going to destroy the entire forest or destroy a city. And we need to basically put out the brush fires wherever they pop up. And the only way we can do this and build a better Canada is if we do it together. So I hope that the people out there who are watching and listening, I invite them to join our campaign against hate, and help us wherever you are in this country. We're looking to build a network of people across the country to combat hate, racism, and bigotry wherever it occurs. So please join us and help us to build a better Canada.
Thank you very much, Mr. Farid Khan. It was wonderful to have you on our show. Thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Viewers, thank you very much for being with us. In our next show, we'll bring a new guest and we'll talk about another aspect of racism in that show. Until then, please take care and stay well. Thank you. Bye bye.